This is the Resilient Advisor Show with Jay Coulter.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Resilient Advisor. Joining me for this show is Jamie Hopkins, and we're going to cover three things. Number one, what do he and his team see in the marketplace today that financial advisors may not be thinking about? Number two, what has he learned from recent episodes of his popular podcast framework? And number three, we're going to go deep on his new book that he co-authored with Ron Carson. I'm going to be giving away 5 copies of Jamie's book to any listener or viewer that writes a review for the show and sends me a screenshot via DM along with your home address. Now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Have you thought about making the move to independence? The Independence Incubator from Resilient Advisor provides a proven roadmap to help advisors understand all of their options. Learn more by visiting independenceincubator.com.
This is Jamie's second time on the Resilient Advisor Show. In fact, Jamie, you probably don't even remember the last one because it was 5 years ago. In fact, it was so long ago, it was audio only. And we actually recorded this thing. I don't know how we did it, but you were on the phone and I somehow had some device that captured the audio and we packaged it up and turned it into a podcast. But a lot has changed in the last 5 years for sure.
Well, hey, that's called progress, right? We are on video. We're out there in the world. We got microphones, not just calling from some landline at the American College 5 years ago.
That's right. That's right. And then all these social media channels to get it out on. So it was actually much, much simpler back then for sure.
Yeah.
So we've known each other for 5 years. I was prepping for the show by listening to some of your old podcasts. I cannot believe I've missed this, Jamie. I did not know that you grew up you were a competitive swimmer and you swam with Michael Phelps. You know, what are listeners and viewers, what can they learn from your experience swimming competitively, especially with somebody that operated obviously at such a high level?
Yeah, I actually get asked about that a lot, which is funny because, I grew up knowing Michael as Michael. He wasn't this, crazy famous guy that, was the most decorated Olympian of all time. I didn't really recognize that till I got to college and somebody had a poster up of him in the room, like down the hall from me. But one of the things I learned from him was process. And that was our coach, Bob Bowman. He kept looking out into the future and looking for the things that were coming down the pipeline to make athletes better and pulling that into our training, our process. So one of the things everybody knows about Michael is him flapping his wings, swinging his arms. And we really stopped doing static stretching early on back there. And we moved to kind of movement-based stretching because there was research showing that static stretching was causing more injuries than it was preventing. So that's just a great example of like looking out into the future, pulling something that people are learning into your practice, into your life, into your process to really take you from that good to great. And that's, to me, one of the things I learned.
Process. That's actually the Nick Saban way at the University of Alabama. He's built an empire with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right,
process, I think. Yeah. Sorry. I was going to say process is important everywhere in life, right? Not just in sports, but how we approach the day, how we approach our families, our loved ones, and financial planning.
That's right. So you and your team at the Carson Group, you work with thousands of financial advisors. As we sit here at the end of 2022, what do advisors not have on their radar that maybe they should as we head into the new year?
Let me give you 3 things here. First one's pretty practical, which is get smarter with clients' cash. There's a lot of other options out there than just money market mutual funds or CDs or holding just in cash at a bank somewhere. There's things like technology in the investment world has improved, right? You've got ultra short treasury duration ETFs that are out there that are paying higher rates than money market. They can be traded intraday with super low fees, lower than the money market funds. And, we could be adding a couple basis points here or there. Sometimes we could be adding significant returns. 100, 200 basis points return on cash to a client by just being smarter about it. So that's number one. Number 2 is we are in a world where technology is coming at us faster and faster and faster. And a lot of firms, a lot of advisors, especially solo RIAs and small RIAs, probably are not checking the right boxes in their due diligence today on doing tech reviews. And I know that they don't want to hear that a lot of times, but I will tell you, I work work with a lot of advisory firms. A lot of times I look at their process and they just go out, they look at something, they adopt it, they use it. That's not going to hit the SEC standard that they're going to want to see for doing that due diligence. So I think that's something to pay attention to. SEC is going to get a little tougher on that moving forward. And then number 3, there is 100% of movement going on out there on the retail client side, the investor side, about aligning their values to their planning, right? Aligning their values to their investments. And that's not just ESG. It's not just greenwashing type stuff that we're getting a little sick of. It is truly looking at what they value in life and pulling that back into their plan. So I don't think if you're not getting into those conversations, you're not starting to think about the behavioral side of planning and investing, you're going to miss the boat there. And it's going to come at you faster and faster than we've ever seen it before. And when you look at that, I use this one, which is more like an ESG one, but a lot of people, if you ask them, hey, are you good with investing in private prisons in your portfolio? And many of them are. The answer is going to be no. But we continue to do that. The values are not aligned with what we want the outcomes to be. And that's got to change in this profession. And it's going to change fast. So I think getting ahead of that as an advisor is super important. And so those are 3 things that, my team and I think advisors out there in general need to look at as you're heading into the next year.
Yeah, that tech stack issue is going to become a challenge for advisors next year. And I think a lot of firms are in denial about what they're going to have to do. All right, so let's pivot to your podcast. So Framework, you've been producing those for a while. You have some great guests on there. You can, listeners, viewers, you can go to any of your podcast players and find it. It's also on the Carson Group website. Let's talk about some of your recent guests, and I'd love to learn your takeaways from that. What did you learn from your interview with the great Daniel Pink?
Yeah, Daniel Pink came and spoke at our Excel conference, our national conference for Carson. It's one of the best conferences out there, right? Kitsy's always rates it as one of the best too for advisors. And it's really a practice management, a little bit of an inspirational conference. So not a lot of financial planning, CE. It's people like Daniel Pink, Abby Wambach, people like that up on the main stage. George Bush was there last year. And one of the things I learned that I've actually used a lot with from my conversation with Daniel Pink was about like questioning things like, what does success mean? That's actually probably my favorite conversation I got to have with him. It's just like, what does it mean to be a successful father? What does it mean to be a successful business person? And that how time bound some of those definitions are. That like, you might not feel successful at all today, but you might look back in 10 years and say, I was doing really well. Or flip side, you might think, right, like you are successful today, but then all of a sudden something falls apart in the future. And did you have success? And kind of defining that for what it means to you, I think is really important. But Daniel Pink is such a brilliant person. I don't know, what is it, 14 or something like that, New York Times bestsellers. I know I introduced him on stage, but I don't even remember the number, but it's a lot. He's just a beautiful mind, such a great presenter. And also like the things that, grief, we talked about that a lot, regret is one of his, bigger books and topics. We talked about regret a lot, and so interesting, all the stories he's been able to hear over the years about things that people regret and the reasons why.
One of the smartest and most articulate advocates for advisors in the industry is Jeff Levine. You had him on the show. What'd you learn from that interview?
Yeah, so Jeff's a good friend of mine. I was actually with him last night up here in New York. And, what I learned from Jeff is, probably 2 things every time I interact with Jeff. One is, how articulate and caring of an individual he is. He won an award up here last night at the Think Advisor Luminaries. And, he just talked about his mom and how important she was to him and this industry. And he talks about how great advisors are. And the second thing is I always learn something from a tax planning perspective when I have Jeff on the show. So that series was super fun. We actually did a 11-part retirement income series that Jeff was part of. And, we had, some of the greats out there, the Christine Benz, Wade Pfau, Michael Fink, Mary Beth Franklin. And, that was a really fun series. I co-hosted that with Devin at PIMCO, used to be at IWI, a great individual, right? And I think that series is probably one of the best things I've gotten to do on Framework because I laid it out like I would have a course. So I kind of built it off what my knowledge of RICP and what I thought a really good retirement income process was, starting with Dana Onspach for the first one. And we had Richard Thaler on the show too, right? His episode's wonderful. He's such a great storyteller, Roger Ibbotson. So we had some really impressive people So if you're interested in retirement income planning, that series of 11 is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have the who's who to break down the subject matter there. And I know as a podcast producer how much work that was for you. So definitely the end product was worth it. Somebody else you've interviewed who's also been on my show is Anthony Zang. And his story is just incredible. What did you learn from your interview with Anthony?
Yeah, he is, I don't know, probably one of the more inspiring people, as you said. Like, you interview him and you also like question how much you do in life. Like, I was like, man, he's on like his fourth company. He really changed the way I viewed some strategies in investing. That was one thing. He also is one of those people, when you hear and listen to him taking risks and just going out and doing things, you just want to run through a wall, right? Like, you're just like, wow, like you just went out and built something new. Then you did it again, and then you did it again. And, you know, he's such a young and, you know, kind of beautiful mind. I don't know, like that guy is impressive beyond his years. You know, if he starts another business and he's looking for backers, I'm in day one. I don't even care what it is, right? It's selling ice to Eskimos, but he's going to do it in an interesting and fun and more dynamic way than's ever been done before. So he was probably one of my favorite, what I would say is delight and surprise guests. I didn't know much about him before we had him on the show, you know, and I don't even remember who introduced us, but somebody introduced us, came on, and just, you know, was phenomenal individual.
Yeah, he really is. So let's pivot to your new book. So Find Your Freedom, Financial Planning for a Life on Purpose. Yes. Co-authored with Ron Carson. All right. So before we get started, because I've heard this on your show, I want to ask you, what is your first money memory?
Yeah. So I'm going to go to actually a variation of it. So one of my first money memories, and my favorite one's actually a buying one. So sometimes I ask this one too, what's your first purchase? And this is the story I like telling. My very first purchase is a fog machine. That was my first big purchase. My grandparents used to give us money for Christmas, and I think it was after Halloween, and there was a fog machine on sale. And so I took all that money that my grandparents were going to give me for Christmas, and I bought a fog machine. Why did I buy a fog machine? Because I love Halloween. I'm a Halloween guru. I had 3 different costumes this year for Halloween. I love it. I throw a decent sized party for my kids and their friends. And we kind of do like I dress up as Jack Skellington, and like kind of they chase me around and I give them candy and presents and stuff. So I'm like a mix of, you know, even in the show movie, like Jack does do Santa Claus. So I kind of played the dual roles there. So that's a super important memory to me. And if you go back a little bit deeper into that memory, my mom used to take me out of school one day a year when I was little, after my dad had passed away. And we would spend the whole day just decorating the house for Halloween. So we'd, you know, stuff the scarecrows, and you used to have these like pumpkin bags back then too, you'd fill with leaves. I don't see those anymore. They might still make them, but we used to, you know, rake up all the leaves and fill that up. And so it had a really like emotional connection to me, the holiday, because it was this time I got to spend with my mom, and kind of like in a very fun and enjoyable way. And it was just like that right day when it just really felt like fall. My mom would say, hey, you want to stay home today and do that in October? And that's got a lot. That's a lot of my positive ones. I've got some negative trauma ones too when my dad passed away, but I think that's probably the more enjoyable ones to talk about, the Halloween and the purchase.
I remember those bags that you stuff full of leaves. I went to high school in the Philadelphia area, and they were everywhere because there's so many. Yep. Right. So I wonder if that's regional. So
yeah, because I grew up in Baltimore. I live outside Philly now, right? And yeah, I just I don't see them anymore though. So like I'm still around Philly, but I don't see those big orange bags. You'd stuff them all up, tie them up. They look like a big jack-o'-lantern. But I remember those from my childhood all the time.
Mm-hmm. And then they became the pylons for your backyard football games.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in your new book, you guys provide the tools for people to explore their past relationships with money. What does that look like for the reader?
Yeah, so the whole first half of Find Your Freedom follows that part. It's this journey to figure out what freedom means to you, what your aspirations are, going beyond just goals, but setting goals, and also exploring that relationship that you have with money. And yes, we all have a relationship with money, and we don't think about it in those terms. But did you grow up with trauma, or did you grow up with abundance, or did you just not talk about money? And all of those start to form your relationship with money. And the other amazing thing that Ron and I talk about in the book is the fact that some of our relationships from money could be, you know, I view it more as like 2, 3 agree, but Ron talks about this sometimes, that trauma can last for 8 generations in a family. It can be passed on for that long. So we can have things that happened hundreds of years ago that are still impacting our lives today and our relationship with money. So we actually have to understand that. So it's looking back at our first money memories, understanding how our parents and grandparents interacted with money and now how that impacted us. And I'll wrap up with a quick story on that one right there. Is my relationship with gifting around money and like buying gifts for people. I don't like it. I remember growing up, I talked about my dad passing away. My mom, part of her love language is giving gifts, but she would overbuy at Christmas and she'd say, hey, this year I'm not going to spend as much. I'm not going to spend as much. And she would overspend. And then there would be so much stress attached to that after the holidays, right? In January, when those credit card bills would show up as a single mom, that created a negative aspect of gifting. I saw the downside of overspending, over gifting, and the stress. So I'm not a big fan of gifts, right? I like doing things with people. I like experiences. I like spending time. I don't want a new shirt. I don't want stuff. But it comes from a place of kind of like, I'd say, negativity there about that relationship I had with it. Now, for some people, gifting still remains super important. For my mom, it's part of the way that she expresses that she loves people is giving gifts. So it is important to her, but it's changed that relationship with me. And I think that's just a really interesting, that's a little vignette or story about how some of your relationships with money could form. Then how do you want to deal with those moving forward? Are you okay with it? Or do you need to change that relationship?
And then after you and Ron walk readers through that, you talk about how you can help define what freedom means to the reader. What does that look like for the reader?
What I talk about when you try to define what freedom means to you, I actually talk about starting with some of your values. So write down a value that defines you, or write down 3 values. And then a really fun exercise after that is actually to go and draw what it would look like. So I'll use an example here. I really love community, and I drew a pineapple. I also really like the idea of grit, right? Being able to overcome things, and I grew an anvil. And so those 2 really represented part of my core values and what I wanted to pass on to my kids. And so those help, right? If you can't figure out what you care about, what values matter to you, then it's very hard to figure out what freedom's going to be. It's very hard to figure out what your aspirations are going to be because you don't know what's guiding you along that path. So I say start there. You can also do things after that. We talk about write your own eulogy. If you haven't done that, it's such a powerful experience. It's really eye-opening. Are you the person that you want to be at your end of life? Are you living that way today? One of my favorite stories was, I think it's like St. Ignatius of Loyola or somebody like that, but it's a story of a monk. He's out at this monastery. He's out in the field working, and somebody learns that he's there, and he's this wise monk, and he wants to come learn from him. And he gets there, and he asks him this beautiful question, which is, what would you do if you knew that the world was ending today? And he's out there in the field farming, and he says, I'd finish this row. He's living the life he wants to live. That sounds like freedom to me. And my personal freedom is getting to get up and design my day how I want it. That's what freedom means to me.
I love it. It's a little bit of a coaching program into financial planning, which there is just not enough out there in the programs that are available. So let's actually use that as a great pivot to talk about how financial advisors could use this tool as a resource in working with clients. What are your thoughts, Jamie?
Absolutely. So we view the book, Find Your Freedom, as a tool for advisors and clients to work better together. When I went out last year, I asked a bunch of my friends on Twitter, Jay, you might have even replied to this. And I said, what are your favorite financial planning books? And I got this whole list. And you know what I realized when I got the list back? I don't think there was a financial planning book on there. They were investment books. They were strategy books, right? It was, how I invest my money. It was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? It's Millionaire Next Door. These were investment-based books. And the reality is the market has a lot of really nice investment-based books, right? But what it does not have is a lot of really good financial planning books that talk about true planning, real planning, right? CFP kind of backed educational standard-based planning where it's not product first, it's not strategy first. It starts with the person first. We got to care about the person before we can put a good plan in place. So then we walk through in the second half of the book. The first half is about figuring out who you are, defining freedom, goal setting, right? Figuring out what happiness is to you, how to spend time. Then the second half, after we kind of figured out who you want to be, we walk through what planning's looking like, because we can't be free if we're not financially free. We've got to take care of that level. Like if we're worried about where we're going to get our next water from, if we're going to worry about where we're going to get our next meal from, where we're going to live, we can't get free. We got to be able to take care of those bases and then move up to an impact level where we can focus back on self-awareness, self-actualization, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the reason why I think this book is so great, it's really like the book too. The audio, look, I recorded it. I think it's great, a Kindle version, but the actual book, we actually left some of those exercises at the end of each chapter where you can write things down like your eulogy. I think I close every chapter off with 5 or 6 reflection questions to answer. Things like your values, things like how you want to be remembered, things like what's your favorite financial experience you've ever had? What's one thing you're really proud of that you're doing well today, and one thing you want to change? And so you can kind of work through those, and you can give them to a client and they can work through some of those, or a prospect that might want to work with you. And you can say, this is the planning promise that I'm going to give you. So if you come work with me, we're going to do true planning. And if you read this book, you understand what that means. And yeah, your process might be a little bit different because it's about you, but we will follow a process that gets you to your freedom. And that to me is a powerful message.
Yes, it is. Jamie, thanks for coming on. Advisors, 2 takeaways from this interview. Number 1, make sure that you are subscribed to the Framework podcast. And number 2, this book is live today as we're broadcasting it. Head over to Amazon.com, grab a copy, grab some for your clients. Jamie, good luck with the launch.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it as always.